Ever wondered what the world thought after every survivor was taken by the entity? It was pretty mysterious after all, and happened all over the world. Today let's take a look at what the world believed happened to each of the survivors of Dead by Daylight. Dwight was taken whilst out in the woods after his boss and co-workers got him drunk on moonshine and left him out there alone. His disappearance could actually be blamed on them somewhat. It'd be believed Dwight was likely just missing at first, with them being able to recount their last time with him, presumed missing I would say with suspicion on his boss. A relative of Dwight also seems to be aware of there being some foul play though, as she investigates his disappearance, and even gets to the realm in her search for him. She's called Elaine Fairfield, and joins up with a number of other survivors' relatives inside of the realm. A previous co-worker of Dwight's also appears on Jane's show, making his story national news more than likely, although through a third party, I suppose, and long after he disappeared. So whilst the wider world probably thinks he's either missing or dead, there are a few people out there who think otherwise. Meg disappeared when out on a run in the woods during the summer. It does seem to be presumed too that something happened to her, as a search party of some kind is formed, and they never find a body, which sort of tells us they presume she's dead, lost in the woods, perhaps tripping and falling somewhere. Claudette is another character, as much of these earlier characters are, who disappeared in the woods whilst on a walk in the middle of a bus journey. No one seems to notice she's gone either. It's only her forum, which she was active on, that notice her disappearance a week later. And they may do some investigating, but ultimately probably couldn't get very far with it being online, and likely not knowing Claudette's name, only her moniker Science Girl. She'd probably go down as a missing person before being assumed dead. Her mother also later goes on Jane's show though, similar to Dwight's co-worker, and we learn of there being a botany curriculum formulated from her notes, so she gets a little bit of notoriety in her own sort of area. I could imagine the people who used to be on her forum too probably do believe she may be alive and out there somewhere, and buy into the disappearance televised on Jane's show. All of the people who go on Jane's show talk about these mysterious disappearances, with there always being a dark fog present. Jake was actually living out in the woods when he disappeared in them, with the police being informed when Jake's mum couldn't contact him, with her being the last line of contact to Jake, as he cut everyone else off. A search party is formed, but bad weather stops them, and Jake is soon presumed dead. His parents don't quite agree though. Similar to Dwight's relative, Jake's parents search for him and even reach the realm looking for him, and join up with the group of other relatives of survivors, which is called the House of Arkham by the way. Nia disappears after being dared to tag Crotus Pren Asylum, which is supposedly haunted. The lore doesn't mention what the world really thought though, instead just saying she was never seen again. I do think it's possible it's believed she ran away or something like that, seeing as she was a bit of a misfit and dabbled into crime. This, or she's simply presumed missing, but out there somewhere. Laurie, we don't really know when exactly she was taken, with her lore just recounting Halloween night. If she's taken at the end of the night, then she's likely simply assumed dead, killed by Myers, and her body never found. Ace is also likely presumed dead, but instead at the hands of debt collectors, many of which he is noted to be indebted to. Ace disappears, and even the law states that his debt collectors can't find him, so he's probably assumed to have run away and be living a covert life, or dead or missing. It's likely he was sort of off the grid from the police anyway, and may not even have a clear paper trail as it were. Bill is presumed dead, and is realistically meant to be dead had the entity not intervened, which is really interesting. Bill was taken when he went to save his group by turning on a generator, sacrificing himself in the process and getting killed by a tank. Bill's body disappearing would hardly be strange either due to all the zombies. Feng is interesting as she was a popular and successful live streamer and professional esports player. Whilst her popularity had declined at the point she was taken, I don't think it was to the extent of no one knowing who she was. Therefore her disappearance would definitely be noticed and raise some red flags, and would probably even make the news. It's going to be known when she disappears. But tracking her last known location is unlikely. She was in a place no one knew of her, and went to many bars where people were probably drunk and might misremember. People may have been around at the time, but they probably wouldn't know anything. Therefore, Feng is probably just assumed dead. David is straight up assumed dead by his own friends when he disappears. They think he picked a fight with someone stronger than him, so that's probably what was assumed. He was a debt collector himself for a time, and was beaten many times too, so his sudden disappearance isn't particularly shocking, even for his friends. Quentin is likely presumed dead at the hands of Freddy by Nancy. There's no one who really knows about Freddy, and Freddy quite likely killed Nancy as well, before coming for Quentin. This means for the police and investigators there's essentially no trace of what happened to Quentin, so he's likely presumed dead. A case very similar to the other murders that had happened in Springwood at the time. Tapp is another character that was meant to die had the entity not intervened. Tapp had just been shot by Zepp Hindle and would have bled out in Gideon Meatplant. He likely did bleed a bit still though after being shot, and so once his blood is found, he'd likely be presumed dead at the hands of Jigsaw, Zepp, or anyone else in the vicinity. Kate disappears whilst out in the woods in a seemingly quite secluded area. Kate, similar to some others, did have a bit of notoriety though, said to be quite a famous singer. She also makes a bit of noise whilst being taken, actively beating back the entity's claws. She's also lifted into the sky with a fog covering her, so it's possible someone at least saw the fog. She also leaves behind her guitar with her initials, so there's bound to be a documentary or something speculating on what happened to her. She would surely be investigated more, it would become news, and it would be known, and I think there probably would be some conspiracy surrounding what happened to Kate. Adam was taken during a train derailment and further after being hit by a detached door. I think he'd simply be presumed dead, likely leaving some blood behind at the scene. Interestingly though, Adam's uncle believes he's still alive and took off after the crash. He doesn't seem set on finding him though, he just believes he's alive, so that's the end of it really. A student of Adam's also seems to think there was something suspicious about the event, with them appearing on Jane's show too, so I suppose there was a fog coming into the train when it derailed and someone witnessed this possibly. Jeff was taken after returning to Ormond to mourn his father's death. Sadly though, after he disappears, people just assume Jeff may have taken his own life or run away by the sounds of how the lore is phrased. His neighbor who took care of his dog eventually lets it become a stray, and ultimately Jeff seems to just be presumed dead and quickly forgotten. It's really sad. Jane and her disappearance would likely be worldwide news, with her being an incredibly famous talk show host. She crashes her car when she's taken, and so it is likely widely assumed she's dead, although a body is never found. So I'm sure there would be people out there who would find it suspicious. The public is said to grieve for Jane, with her popularity surging even further after her presumed death. A disappearance this high profile would surely draw a lot of attention. Jane's case is even more interesting due to her also having guests on her show that knew about other entity disappearances. Her own disappearance, therefore, is super suspicious, or definitely would be to some, especially if there was any footage of a fog anywhere near her disappearance, or crash, but there's no note of that. Ash was taken during an apocalypse, and so it's not very likely anyone knows he's missing or what happened to him. The world has far bigger problems, honestly, but I suppose even bigger problems without him there. Nancy and Steve both disappear whilst investigating Hawkins' lab, a place which is sort of the place where people disappear in Hawkins, and so not too surprising, but something the other townspeople would investigate. Their disappearances are likely placed onto Hawkins' lab though, instead of anything supernatural, and they're more than likely assumed to be in the Upside Down or killed by a Demogorgon or something. Yui disappears during a motorbike race after she enters a mysterious fog. This must have been seen by quite a few people and bystanders and be regarded as pretty mysterious, and it being possible that her competitors also saw her disappear. This would seem odd to presume her dead after this, with so many eyes on the event. The greater presumption I think would be that she'd run away possibly, or I suppose biked away. I don't think she would be assumed dead though, because if she was assumed dead, it would be presumed to be by a motorbike crash, but there's no evidence of that anywhere there. Because when Yui gets taken into the realm, she gets taken with her bike, so nothing would be left behind. So something surely suspicious about that. Zarina gets taken whilst investigating Deathslinger's old cell, the same place he too was taken from. Her disappearance in the prison would certainly raise some alarm bells, with her just becoming critically and worldwide acclaimed for her documentary. A good possibility is that the gang she exposed in this documentary who killed her father may have been believed to kill her, or disappear her too, especially as she's agitated one of their members quite a bit. A relative of Zarina, much like some others here, does investigate and go to the realm looking for her too, so not everyone would believe this story. Her mother also went on to the Jane Romero show and discussed how Zarina was taken by a fog. It would be known, but the mother is seen to be sort of crazy, especially by the show's producers, although much of the audience seems to think otherwise. Cheryl disappears in a call center for troubled youths after she recently starts working there. She gets a strange call and a fog seems to envelop her. Her life was already very much surrounded by strange occurrences, and so it's possible Silent Hill would be blamed as a place, and her disappearance may not even be investigated, but instead accredited to that. Felix is taken on Dire Island, the same place Blight and Felix's parents were taken. He was running a restoration project there at the time, and so likely had a lot of people he was employing. His girlfriend also knew where he was, and likely the history of the place too. Therefore, when he disappears, it could be presumed he either ran or died of grief, or possibly something supernatural did occur, especially with the location's history. Felix likely didn't hit the news, however, with Élodie never mentioning his disappearance. It would surely be a big deal if a prior pariah had disappeared. Élodie disappears in some Parisian catacombs, and likely the only person who knows her whereabouts is her employer, the Collector. Otherwise, she's likely pretty off-grid, and as her work is pretty dangerous, I think her disappearance is no shock. The Collector, in fact, likely assumes she perished somewhere in the catacombs at the hands of the Black Veil members. This would have been her fate after all, as she was stabbed by a cult member and left to die, only for the entity to save her by taking her to the realm. Yun-Jin is taken moments before Trickster planned to kill her, after killing all of the other Mighty One board members. Yun-Jin would simply be presumed to have the same fate, I think, with her fingerprints being at the scene. It's also plausible that people would believe that she was Trickster's accomplice after all his murders were uncovered. Jill and Leon can be paired together as they're both taken during the same 24-hour window in Raccoon City, just hours before it gets completely nuked. Anyone who may have encountered them along the way would likely die as well, with them being taken by the entity, meaning there is basically no evidence of Jill and Leon being there, and no trace of them at all once the nuke hits. This would mean the world would simply have no clue what happened to them, and they'd surely be presumed dead due to the blast. Mikaela, interestingly, was known to be more than dead or missing, with Sable having a hunch that Unknown had something to do with it. This wasn't the case, of course, but Sable was somewhat on the right track of it being supernatural. Interestingly, this has sort of a chain reaction too, as Orela then knew of Sable, and possibly her disappearance also. Granted, Orela does not seem to mention or be aware of any foul play though. Therefore, I think Mikaela and Sable's disappearances are likely chalked up to Greenville's history of disappearance and missing persons. Sable disappears in the abandoned Greenville theatre though, whereas Mikaela disappears on stage with a live audience. It's plausible they initially think Mikaela played a trick of some kind, but with time and her not returning, her disappearance may be deemed far more mysterious, with many theories arising. Jonah's involvement in the CIA and his defiance of them probably makes his disappearance at the Eyrie a concern for them, but likely not the wider world, with the CIA surely covering up his disappearance for their eyes only. Yoichi is surely presumed dead by means of shipwreck. Yoichi was sailing out to the Seven Hunters on a boat to try and take down Sadako once and for all, when his boat hits a storm, and he's left shipwrecked before getting taken by the entity from a lighthouse. However, it's likely presumed by the world that he simply died at sea, those who knew him believing he simply went crazy and died out there. Haddie disappears in quite a secluded location in the Alps, where she sees a vision of her parents' death before being taken. The only people who knew where she was were her uncle and brother. As she frequented these mysterious and haunted locations around the world, it's likely assumed that something bad happened to her though, especially by her audience. She stepped into somewhere a bit too horrific. Her disappearance would surely raise flags too, due to who she is, but also due to her fame as a podcaster. People would more than likely believe, or at least theorize, that something supernatural happened to her. Ada is taken during RE4 after being captured by Los Illuminados. The only people who knew she was there were Leon and Wesker, I believe. Therefore, upon her disappearance, she's likely simply presumed dead, KIA, by the Illuminados. Rebecca is taken whilst investigating an Umbrella facility underground, similar to the other RE characters, with her location and target she already had on her back from Umbrella. She's more than likely presumed dead, or dead regardless once Raccoon City is wiped off the map. Vittorio disappears after scratching out some symbols into his cell that Knight traps him in. He creates a sequence which which seems to summon the entity, resulting in him being taken. Knight throws him in a cage and forgets about him, having to deal with the townsfolk who are rebelling against his presence. Therefore, whilst Portoscuro's residents and Knight know of where Vittorio is, when his cell is found empty, he's likely just presumed dead. Anyone who knew of what the symbols were are gone now, with both Vittorio and Knight being taken, leaving just Vittorio's strange cell behind. A mystery likely unsolved. Thalita and Renato are both taken at the same time when fleeing the Skull Merchant. Renato is attacked and bleeds, and so they are both likely assumed dead at the hands of Merchant, as she was taken too, and her base of operations was presumably left behind and found. All of that evidence would be there, and the two of them would be presumed her victims. Especially as they owned a business of their own, it would be assumed she led them out there and did the same to them that she did to all the others. Gabriel was on a far-off planet of Devaka with no ability to transmit to Earth. He, along with all the crew that died, would also be presumed dead, I think. The colony is destroyed on Devaka, and there's no trace of the crew or even Hux, of course. It may be presumed that some kind of alien life got him killed. Nicolas Cage is another huge case, of course, when disappearing. It's going to definitely be global news and widely known if he were to disappear for an extended period or presumed dead. He was taken during his recreation of Blight's own circumstances of being taken for a Descend Beyond movie. There was likely a trail of some kind left too, with him taking a jet over to the Pacific. His vague whereabouts and connections to Pauline Stamper would surely be investigated and known eventually. Something suspicious would be presumed, I think. Or it's quite likely Pauline, or someone in that group, were blamed for his murder. Ripley would simply be assumed dead. Not only did her entire crew die to the xenomorph, but the Nostromo was also destroyed, leaving just her escape pod, which she disappeared from. She would most definitely be presumed dead. Alan Wake is already sort of lost in the dark place where his stories are coming to life when he walks into the fog after writing a story about it. Therefore, there's probably no one who knows what happened to Alan, with him almost being 2 realms deep, as it were. Something supernatural could be presumed, but as mentioned, it was the dark place, then the realm, so it would be very hard to track him down. He's probably just assumed dead. Aestri and Baermar are simply and surely presumed dead at the hands of Vecna. It was widely known they were questing to try and defeat him, and it was also assumed this would end in their deaths, so it would be no surprise to anyone when they didn't return. Lara Croft is captured after trying to save her friend on the island of Yamatai, with her diving off a bridge to escape her captors. When she lands in the water below, she's dragged down by hands grasping at her. If she didn't return from Yamatai, it was likely presumed she was dead, and even for her captors, they likely believe this is the case too, with her falling into the river and never seeing her again. So Lara probably goes down as dying on Yamatai, an unsuccessful expedition that she should have never gone on. Trevor Belmont disappears after defeating Dracula with a special whip and becoming reclusive, living in a small home in the hills. When the entity begins to haunt the town nearby, he investigates and is soon consumed by the entity. There would likely be very little trace, therefore, of what happened to Trevor, with him already being reclusive. He'd maybe be presumed dead, maybe become a monster hunting legend of the nearby town, or possibly be assumed to be out there still. I like the idea that he sort of became a kind of legend though, assumed to be roaming the hills to some degree. Taurie, interestingly, is likely assumed to have gone to the realm. She was, after all, a member of the Black Talon, or Black Veil, and so upon her disappearance after her initiation, they all likely believe she succeeded and she managed to get into the realm, fulfilling her goal to become a killer or disciple for the entity. It's quite interesting viewing it from this perspective, actually. It's also possible they didn't believe this, seeing as she didn't end up killing Jordan. But I think that's the more interesting way to look at it, so we'll go with that. Orela disappears after hosting an Entity's Realm themed night at her haunted house. The fog appears and absorbs her into it. That's, well, I mean, that seems to be what happens when you imitate the entity and the realm in some way. Similar to how the entity appears when Nick Cage recreates how Blight was taken, it's quite likely this is a perfect setup, however, for her to be found, with the world being aware of Orela's surroundings when she disappears and being able to possibly connect it to the other strange fog disappearances from around the world. Weirdly, the entity may have slightly screwed itself in this case. Well, I do hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.